Hey, my name's shawnshawn. I sell art on shawnshawn.co. Today we're going to react to Matthew White. So Matthew White is a watercolor instructor, so let's check out his channel, guys. So looking at his channel, we have kind of a nice watercolor in the background, watercolor tutorials with Matt White. His channel is focused only on watercolor, so it's kind of an interesting, really tight niche medium focus. Watercolor background. This title doesn't necessarily stand out against the watercolor. You might want to maybe add a shaded box to make that white stand out there. And he has Instagram and I think maybe a website. His tutorials. He has a headshot for his logo, but it's kind of I think I would tighten it in so it was like this big. He has it like really far back. So when you see that, you probably can't recognize him, so you probably should have a much closer logo. He can fix that. His intro video is how to start a watercolor painting, so that's really smart. And he has uploads, so probably Roy wants to organize some playlists, and then he can kind of layer those, like how-to, time-lapse, I don't know, different. He probably has enough videos to do time-lapse playlists, because I think he has maybe 20, 30 videos, so he definitely has enough to make some playlists. He can reorganize his playlist. He also probably want to do one specifically popular uploads. That would be an easy one to you just sort your top 10 videos and then have it sort by popularity and put that at the top, I would think. But yeah, let's go check out one of his videos. So this one is called Why I Stopped Taping Down My Watercolor Paper. Ooh.
One of the most common questions that I get is, why don't you tape your paper down when you paint? So today I'm going to talk about why I stopped taping my paper down and some of the advantages that come with that decision.
So I like he has this really short, he has his focus on his head, and then he does a quick watercolor and he's like boom into his video. He's very calm, very chill personality off right out the bat.
Workshop with Andy Evenson, and he's a fantastic watercolor artist. And I noticed that he didn't tape his paper down to a board or any type of surface when he was painting. In his workshop, I tried to paint that way as well. At first, it was very unsettling that my paper was just sitting on my surface, and it was uncomfortable painting that way. But I started to watch him paint, and I realized a few things. I started to realize how important my first wash of my painting was for values and for the colors, the different color changes around the scene of my painting.
So what he's doing here is he's kind of water on top of the pencil. You can actually fix it, put a fixative, and that pencil will be sharp, but it'll be fixative, paint on top of. Watercolor doesn't necessarily work well because the watercolor really interacts with the paper, so I don't think you can necessarily use fixative, but you can freeze those lines with fixative.
When I started to wet my paper down and I followed this Andy Evenson approach, this gave me more time to paint wet into wet. And there are some benefits that go with that.
All right, let's skip ahead a little bit here, guys.
It's a lot more time to work on this first wash.
I like too that he's showing he's painting from a photo. A lot of realist painters paint from photos, but they never admit to it.
Part of our medium, it's the only time you can load up a brush and let colors just flow freely from one into another. And this soft glow that you get in some scenes, I really like a sense of light and a sense of glow. All that can happen when I'm paying attention to those things within my first wash.
I really like this calm sense. Let's skip ahead a little bit, guys.
Wet. The second part to this approach is I was painting at an angle, a fairly steep angle, 30 or 40 degrees maybe. And when I started this approach of just wetting the paper down, I flattened out my workspace a little bit more. Now it's not completely flat, maybe 10 to 15 degrees of angle, but while I'm working wet into wet on these longer scenes, I don't want all my washes to flow one direction. I don't want them to all flow down on my paper. And if I'm working on more of an angle, that's kind of what's happening. You're getting a lot more.
Yeah, with watercolor, you almost always want to work flat because of the water. It'll just tend to drip. If you want that look, it's cool, but most watercolor will always be flat, and then you work with the water because it's very, very drippy.
Effect of your washes flowing in one direction. So some of the concerns that I had and that I hear from people that haven't tried this before is it's a little uneasy to not have your paper taped down to the surface.
I've done it both ways, but it looks kind of cleaner if you tape it down because it stays flat.
And some people don't like that. If you like to paint very precise, you don't want It might be easier for you to just tape your paper down and leave it that way.
Yep.
Another con is if you like to pick up your painting while you're in progress and tilt it around and let your washes flow different directions, you can't really do that with this approach. Once it's on your surface and it's wet on both sides, it's kind of just going to be there until it dries.
All right, so let's skip closer to the end, guys. I don't know what
Tips to help you avoid overworking your...
So I think he ends his videos with introducing the next video, which is really strong because you can just watch a series of videos. Super chill personality. I've never met a personality that's so chill for painting. Although watercolor is very precise, so I can imagine the type of person that would like watercolor would have to be very precise, but then kind of chill. Because you can't be like, throw the paint on there like you can with acrylic or oil. So you have to be a little more chill, more methodical, I think. This next painting or video is called 10 Quick Watercolor Tips That Will Help Your Paintings Today.
Welcome if this is your first time here. Welcome back if you've seen any of my other videos. Today I'm going to give you 10 quick watercolor tips that can make a difference in your paintings today.
Looks like he plays the drums too, maybe. I like this super quick intro too.
Tip number 1. Use the right size brush. In a way, watercolor is a little bit like golf. The less strokes that you need, the better off that you're going to be. The less brush strokes you use, the more fresh your painting is going to look. A good way to use less brush strokes is to use the right size brush. So if you're painting a large area in your scene, make sure that you are using a brush that's big enough. Quick tip number 2, if you're painting vertical lines, like say you're painting the mast of a ship or a boat, turn your painting sideways to paint that straight vertical line. And this is helpful for a few different reasons. Painting sideways like that is a more natural movement than pulling up and down with your arm. This can be helpful if you're painting something like power poles or signs or a mast of a ship.
Let's go to the next tip here. I'm trying to make it faster, guys.
Tip number 3, don't draw too light. When you are drawing for your watercolor, you are creating kind of a roadmap for your painting. And what tends to happen, and I still do this sometimes myself, after I paint my first wash, my sky, a little bit of the colors around the scene, I've sometimes covered up my drawing and I've lost my way. And the drawing is important because it helps us to maintain proper perspective in our scene. If you're painting more complicated shapes such as cars, figures, things that need to be kind of exact, your drawing is important in those scenarios as well. So you want to make sure that your drawing is strong enough that you can see it after you've painted your first wash of your painting.
Wow, you see those lines on the pavement? That's so freaking awesome. Let's go next ahead here.
Just the sky, then when you go back in with your clouds, you're going to leave some harsh lines maybe that you didn't want. Now, I don't care if there are some pencil lines visible around the scene. That doesn't really bother me. But recently I painted a painting that I was pretty happy with, except I got a little carried away with my pencil line up in the sky.
It looks bad.
I was
really
drawing
bad.
where I wanted this distant hill to be, and I drew it too dark, and it drove me crazy that I was overall pretty happy with the scene, but now I have this dark pencil line in the sky.
Draw another mountain range, bro. Like, that's
Tip
what I would
number
do.
5, use 100% cotton paper.
Okay, let's skip ahead a little bit. There's a lot of good tips in here, guys. I'd probably watch the whole video by itself.
Mix more paint than you think you're going to need. It's inevitable. You think you have plenty of paint on your palette ready to go, and it goes a lot faster than you think, and you're out of paint and you're trying to mix and your painting is drying up and it's causing problems. Be proactive here and mix a little more paint than you think you need. I would rather waste a little bit of paint than mess up my painting when I'm trying to mix in the middle of a delicate wash. And
Really
things are
great painting
drying,
too.
And it's frustrating.
That nice foggy look, really
plan
sharp.
ahead, mix a little more paint than you think you're going to need. Quick tip number 9. Variety is key. We don't want to paint a large section of our scene all in one color. We want to mix it up. We want to add some variety because variety equals interest. If one large area of your painting is all done in one color, in one value, it's going to become quite boring.
Yeah, that's pretty solid in any painting. You want to have a variety of values. Like what I do for the values is what you can always do is take a picture with your phone and you can switch it to black and white. So then you'll see if there's, you want to have like that gray, a little bit of white, a little bit of maybe pure black or close to pure black. I would just get close to pure black, but not really black. And watercolor might be the opposite. You might actually go to pure black, but have a lot of grays in between. That's going to be like most of your painting, maybe 50-60%. A little bit of whites to really make it pop. A little bit of blacks to make that pop as well.
And might be the most important one, and that is don't rush. The trick with watercolor is it demands us to move fairly quickly because things are drying, especially in our middle value wash where we're thinking about edge, color change, value. We're trying to make a large connected shape a lot of times. That's a lot of things to think about all at once. So we have to slow down and be present, but we can't move too slow where things are drying up and causing problems within our scene. Finding that balance between urgency and rushing, I think, is important. And also just in the flow of painting a watercolor, we don't want to rush getting into our darks of our scene when it's too early. The temptation is that when we are painting, we
I love that brush is using. It's like a Chinese brush, I think. It's
quickly want it to look like something.
Or maybe Japanese.
And in watercolor, because we are painting essentially in reverse with our lightest values to our darkest values, it might not look like much early on in the process.
Nope.
And the temptation is to jump ahead and put in our middle values and our darks when it's too early. So having a game plan in your painting.
I like this. This is really teaching you. I've only done I've done ink tints, which is similar to watercolor, and I've only done a little bit, so I kind of get what he's saying. You just start getting really dark, and then you can't erase the dark stuff. Or the really like bright red and girl blue. It looks very garish. So in watercolor, you want to be very, very light and just slowly work up and then figure out where you want to accent without really dark, but just have a lot of really slight washes.
So important. Understanding what you're trying to accomplish each step along the way, in your first wash, in your second wash, in the finishing details of your scene. If we can remember what the goal of each step is and stick to our game plan, we're gonna have a much greater chance.
A really beautiful painting. Let's go into the next video, guys. So next video is how to paint light in watercolor, step-by-step tutorial.
One of the greatest things that we can improve on as artists is learning how to portray light.
I like this straight-on shot, but you should always introduce yourself because you never know which video people are going to stumble on, and YouTube tends to suggest videos, so you always want to introduce yourself and say, "Hi, I'm Matthew White. I specialize in watercolor painting. I do tutorials," and then start the video, because then you're kind of like lost, like, oh, what kind of, is this a painting tutorial? What is this, you know? Obviously, it's probably going to say in the title, but this kind of helps it patch together for a brand new viewer, which 95% of your viewers are going to be brand new. So always introduce yourself and then close as well, like that.
In a believable way. Well, that's exactly what we're going to work on today, and I'm going to walk you through step by step on how I paint this Venice street lamp. So in order to get this much light in your painting, we need to get a lot of darks in our paintings, because without the darks, we can't really have the light in our scene. I've refilled some of my colors here that I'm going to be using frequently in the scene. So when I go to mix, I can really get a good amount of paint on my brush and mix some strong mixtures in order to get the light to really shine in the scene. So as in most scenes with watercolor, we're going to be painting.
Oh, skip ahead a little bit, guys.
Paint around that a little more, adding some more of this bright gold color.
So you want to make beautiful paintings, but how do you actually get there? This is where I started, and
So here he's doing real-time photos, video, with no sound at all in the background. You could probably add sound, I would suggest, because you don't.
And there's some of that gold reflecting on the lamppost as well.
There's no sound in this type of painting. Some painting you'll have like a sound of scratching the surface.
All right.
But watercolor is very quiet.
I'm going to take a synthetic smaller brush and get it damp. And it's helpful to have a paper towel in your hand to take off some excess moisture if you need to. And I want to soften some of these edges. I don't want a hard edge around my light. I want it to glow like it does in our reference photo.
That makes sense. Soft edges.
Now it's time to get into some much stronger values.
That's really cool. Let's go ahead a little bit, guys, here.
It is that you'll get a whole bunch when you don't necessarily mean to.
It's interesting. He drops the sky all the way down versus
More
trying to
cerulean.
protect
I want it to be cooler. This cooler
buildings.
color here at the top. See what that looks like.
Because you would assume almost with watercolor that you would have to preserve some of those highlights on the buildings, but I guess you don't have to. I haven't done that much, so again, I'm pretty novice when it comes to watercolor. Look at these badass brushes he's got. Another important point is if you do multiple mediums, separate them into watercolor brushes, oil brushes, acrylic brushes ideally. You want to have them separate because if you start mixing, you're going to roughen up the brushes and you don't want to really use a really rough acrylic brush in watercolor, for example.
Need to get even darker. So I'm going to mix in some Payne's Gray.
It's interesting too, he's just doing real time versus time lapsing it.
Cobalt Blue.
It's a really dark color.
And some cerulean. Probably the deepest, richest blue color that I can mix. Because I really want this light to stand out. And I'm going to go back over this one more time at the top.
Wow, that's a really dark. It looks super dark on the watercolor palette. But I guess it's appropriate. I'm just surprised that works. I would have surprised it would be too much. But it's very intense with a lot of water to paint ratio.
Take a little bit of that off my brush. Add in some more cerulean.
All right, he's going to blend that down. Let's go down. I'm going to scroll ahead of you guys.
Need to mix in some colors. And I'm going to start with some Payne's Gray.
I like how the figures are really cool in his painting. In the photo, they're just kind of like two tourist schmucks working
Some
or something.
raw
But
umber.
his look like more symbolic, you know, kind of like traditional figures walking, which is what you want to do. You want to reinterpret
And some
a
cobalt
scene.
blue. Maybe some cerulean.
He's cut out the ugly scene.
I'm not really too concerned what color this is exactly.
I don't think he's going to paint that ugly wagon, you know.
I just want to make sure that I'm painting it strong enough. Okay, so I'm going to start kind of in the middle here. And I can kind of see my drawing, but I'm really going off of just what I'm looking at in my reference photo. And I just want a shape that lets us know that there's buildings in the background.
It's really interesting how watercolor, you just kind of start with these general shapes and then work your way in. Because it's very exact, but then it looks very, I don't know, it's interesting. It can look very casual. Not casual, but I don't know what the word is, but just super loose, you know? But then it's very tight because you have to do the detail right.
I can leave some gaps every now and then, just kind of suggest some detail.
Just changing up the brush. It's interesting. He
Really
just goes
hoping
right through the
to
light post.
simplify what I'm seeing back here. As I come down, I'm going to leave kind of a bead at the bottom of that where it's still damp. So I can continue painting down, painting around my figure here and around the other figure as well. And I'll come back and address those in a minute, trying to create an impression of what I'm seeing back here.
Yeah, it's so cool in watercolor because you just kind of simplify and you don't really paint exactly what you see. You kind of simplify it, so it's a really cool painting process.
We can go a little warmer and a little stronger in value.
Like it's a very inexact shadow of the building, but it's very like inexact and it's just one color, right? So it's very cool in that this kind of a medium. Also, it's way cheaper than other mediums like oil or acrylic.
By leaving a few gaps, we can kind of suggest a little bit of the complexity and detail that's in this building. I can add more strength on this side.
Yeah, I want to make that darker.
Give it a little more form. All right.
Turn it sideways.
Okay, I'm adding some more raw sienna into this.
Okay. Guess it's gonna be the closer parts, or
And
what?
just continue down. Kind of have a hard edge here. And we're going to go back down to this edge that we're working from. More raw umber, burnt sienna, some cobalt blue. Kind of a stronger, warmer.
All right, let's skip ahead a little bit, guys. Super interesting, though.
Mix up some raw sienna, raw umber, some neutral tint. Basically a darker, richer in value warm color. Now I like to have a scrap piece of paper on the side where I can practice my brush marks if needed. We're going to start with that main lamp there. And the parts that are closer to the light source need to be warmer. So I'm using more raw sienna in those areas.
I guess he's doing that top part of the lamp. Make it really stand out. Yeah, look at those tiny lines to do that. Boom. Just a little bit of an accent. It's pretty badass. Like, you don't always need to finish the line, just kind of a suggestion of the line, and the eye will kind of carry it through.
It's amazing when you get some darks around the light source, how the light really starts to stand out.
Yeah, so he hasn't finished those lines all the way through. But you, in the photo also, the light kind of blinds out those solid lantern lines, so that's staying true to the photo. Just a little bit. Very, very cool. Okay, let's skip ahead a little bit.
On the tip of my brush, and I'm going to show you what using gouache is good for. So on the top of this lamp, these other two lamps that are being lit up by this main lamp,
I think he's going to add some whites here.
Yep. You can add just a couple highlights. And
it's funny too, if you do these watercolor submission contests or whatever, they'll be like, you can't use gouache, that's cheating. Like, dude, you need to do it for a painting. Like, you want to make the painting look good, why would you just stick to only one medium? Like, you add a little bit of gouache, like, it's 99% watercolor, but you'll see these watercolor purists. No, you can't do that, that's cheating.
On our figures.
Yeah, see how that's just making that pop with just a touch of white? Like I mentioned before, that value is just a little bit of whites, a little bit of super dark.
We can do the same thing.
And you're just catching the light right off the shoulder, which is really nice.
Maybe there's some lights in the background. Mainly, painting light comes down to values. Making sure that you're painting strong enough, compensating for drying, using fresh paint.
Really cool. So I'm going to leave that there. And I'm going to go to the website. Let's see what his website looks like. It's whiteart.com. He has another website just for tutorials, but this is his fine art. So he has kind of a scroll on his main webpage of different paintings he's done. So that's really cool because you get a feel for the work. He has this really nice detail, and then his really like great abstracted art that you have. Yeah, it's a really simple, just got some recent works, and that's it on that scroll point, which is really good. He's got a portfolio, so he has this really strong paintings. And I think you can click into these different topics, street scenes, landscapes and rural, boats and beaches, winter scenes, interiors. So this is good, strong. Words are not overly complicated. They're layman's terms as far as if you're just a brand new collector, you're going to be like, interior, oh, that's inside of a house. Winter scenes, okay, it's winter. Boats and beaches, okay, it's seascapes, you know. So you want to use those really simplified teams. Don't make it too, fine art kind of terms that will turn off beginning collectors. Here's a little about section, which is just, your classic stuff that you would have. Kind of the galleries like this look. He's got a contact page. Very simple. It's weird because he has a contact page plus join my email list. So a little bit confusing. Maybe it'd make more sense to kind of differentiate what the difference is there. Like what you get getting subscribing. That might be cool. Maybe it's just the newest artwork. I don't know. He has a membership level, which is $10 per month. That's really, affordable, I think. The only problem is there's tons and tons and tons of tutorials on YouTube. I mean, I found this myself. I have 100 patrons. I don't think anyone's watched them. Because there's so much great painters. Like, if you have really great painters, like, are you really going to pay for it? But you want to make your money as an artist. So having a paid tutorial is definitely a smart thing to do. And people that are fans and they can't maybe afford a painting yet, maybe your paintings are really pricey. I don't know how much his paintings are. Maybe they're in thousands. So But usually watercolor is a little bit less, even though I would really argue that it's more difficult than oil or acrylic, but in the market it's really weird. They're priced lower than acrylic and lower than oil, which is the maximum, which, is kind of this weird bias towards oil. But I would argue that watercolor is way more challenging. The good thing about watercolor is it's cheaper, so you're going to be a lot more affordable as far as the materials go. You can obviously spend a lot in any kind of things, but yeah, I think he has just a really nice, simple, straightforward website. Not too much on it, but enough to kind of get a feel for who he is, his artwork, and contact him. So yeah, I would recommend it. It looks pretty good. If you like to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you on the next Artist React video. Thanks, guys.